You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight on episode 50, we're going to go around the league discussing the latest Overwatch League news. We have a couple of teams trading some players, DC signs its first player and finds a head coach, and of course, we're going to take a look back at the Overwatch World Cup Bangkok group stage, and look ahead at the Paris group stage, which is, looks pretty, clear as to who's probably going to come out on top, unlike last week, which had quite a few surprises. But before we can get into that and introduce you to my co-hosts, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us here tonight for our live show on Twitch. Granted, we're a couple days later, and, actually, technically both of our shows are going to be late this week. Obviously, it's a big week nonetheless. Whole lot of moving going on, but I do want to thank everyone that's hanging out with us tonight, and of course, thank all of our repeat listeners. As you can tell, we are a man short tonight. Slambo, my soulmate, is not with us, trying to probably finalize his spot on that Atlanta airport's, coach and staff. They're looking pretty healthy already with LNL, and all of that. But as you can see, I am joined by my co-host, Spider, and Spider, it's been a pretty hectic week. We got a ton more roster changes. We've had a lot of drama in regards to certain leaks, which we'll probably not really get to touch on, but we'll definitely bring it up tomorrow on H&D. But how has your week been, man?
It's been awesome. I mean, I had some family fly in the past week, took the week off of work, and consequently, that's why we're late. Because their last night was Monday night, and I felt like it was probably better to spend the night with them and just hang out and talk to them. So I kindly asked you to move the show, and you fit it into your busy schedule. And luckily, Ednar canceled tonight.
Luckily, he's sick.
Luckily he canceled. Not lucky that he's sick. So I hope he feels better. But it all works out in the end. I mean, we're gonna talk about a bunch of Overwatch. I didn't get to play a whole lot of Overwatch. I did work a little bit on the Doomfist account, and man, Doomfist is really, really fun when people don't know how to play, because they just stand there and take it on the chin. So I did finally get into games where I'm playing against competent people, so it's getting a little tougher. So this Friday I will pick that account up, and you guys can see how terrible Doomfist I am. But yeah, I mean, the spice and the salt and the rumor mill this week was in full effect, and this is what we wanted. I mean, this is when we went into the offseason, we were like, okay, we want all these rumors, we want all these leaks from Leak Boy and Michael and all of this stuff, or Mickle, or however you want to say it.
Number 2 Tracer.
Number 2 Tracer in the world. And man, it just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating, and this I can't ask for anything more. So I will definitely mention certain things tonight, but nothing newsworthy. Just I'll sprinkle it in like you should with salt.
Absolutely, yeah. There have been a lot of leaks, a lot of rumors going around in the rumor mill. And some of them have definitely been blown out of proportion, and some have been pretty hasty when it comes to certain individuals on an expansion team in particular. But it's been a spicy week, but I don't want to really deep dive into that. Obviously, there's been a ton of stuff going on. We do have some player movement, a couple of trades going on. Just as a reminder, with the player trades, this is going on basically throughout all of the different sign-in windows. It wasn't just open with that initial window when it comes to like the contract extension. So obviously right now we are in the free agent sign-in window for these expansion teams, and we do have one sign-in so far, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But let's talk about some of the player trades that have been going on. So first up, we have a trade between the Seoul Dynasty and the Florida Mayhem. So the Dynasty have transferred one of their tank players, Zephyr. He was one of their off-tank players, and he is going to the Florida Mayhem. So Zephyr, this is a player that saw pretty limited play on Seoul compared to, his counterparts. And he only played 2 matches in Stage 1. He only played 1 in Stage 2, and he played the majority of his matches in Stage 3, where he played 6 matches altogether. So, with this transfer, it brings the Dynasty roster down to 6 players. Mayhem now have 4 players. Obviously, the Mayhem made a ton of changes. Basically, gut in the whole Misfits organization, minus Tavik. So, they kept at least 1 member on the roster for whatever reason. But anyways, obviously, Dynasty are going through a restructure, as are the Mayhem, and, it kind of seems like Mayhem are leaning towards more of a Korean-heavy roster, at least so far. Obviously, they are still missing a ton of pieces on this roster, and hopefully, this is just going to give Zephyr more of an opportunity to play, rather than just kind of being on bench status, like what he was with the Seoul Dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that we see Zephyr move off of Seoul. Seoul had a myriad of issues in Season 1, but off-tank was really not one of them. Zumba more than held up his end of the bargain. He made the best of a bad situation, and not to say that Seoul was a bad situation, but he was definitely one of the few standouts on the team. It was basically him and Fleta that I would say were consistently at a level that they needed to be to perform. It was the rest of the team that was kind of struggling, particularly the main tank role and some issues in the support roles. But yeah, you touched on the big point. It really seems like Florida is going to go Korean, like Korean into Vic. So basically, they're going to have a guy that can drive the bus and then a bunch of Koreans in the back of the bus. Because right now, 3 of the 4 known roster spots are Korean. And it doesn't surprise me that they're going to build this way. They've seen what Korean teams can do with London, New York, obviously Seoul. Even though they struggled, they were still top half for most of the season. It was really only going to knock them off of top half. But yeah, I mean, good for Zephyr. I think he deserves a chance to show us what he can really do, because I think what we did get to see of him on Seoul wasn't the best showing that he could have done in a whole team environment, because you could tell the team was having internal struggles at that point. So they were like, put Zephyr in and see if he fixes it. Put Ryu Jae Hong on tank, see if that fixes it. Like it was just throwing stuff against the wall and see what would stick. And that's not fair to him. It's kind of the same thing that happened to London, where they were swapping people in and out. And once they sat down and focused on it, you got to see how good these players were. And I hope we get to see that from Zephyr.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of funny. Like we saw, obviously like this Misfits organization, at least most of the roster that was part of Florida Mayhem is long gone at this point from Florida. And they're also long gone from the World Cup, spoilers. We saw how that played out, much to our disappointment. I mean, Sweden completely shit the bed and destroyed our, pre-World Cup power rankings, because we all had him, top 6, and yeah,
they should have really reinforced their back line.
Yeah, definitely. There were numerous issues. But yeah, that was part of it. But when I think of Tavik, obviously, we kind of go through like his other monikers. And, he's very prominent when it comes to the kebab. So, that could be his other role for the Mayhem moving forward. So not only is he driving the bus, but he's also in charge of making sure that they have enough kebabs to eat. So
Chef Tavik.
Well, yeah, we'll see exactly how Tavik is going to fit into the grander scheme of things. But for now, it does look like they are going to be Korean heavy. So with that being said, there's been a couple of a little bit of talk about recoloring, some of the brands, and, Mayhem were one of those teams that were wanting to do that, and, with all this open spot, the runaway dream with Florida is still alive. We are hoping for that, rebrand of the colors, go into that, pink and blue of Runaway or Miami Vice, whichever way you want to look at it. So I'm not going to say it has the highest possibilities, but that doorway is still ajar. It might not be like fully open, but there's always that hope. But I want to see it happen. But my gut is telling me the chances of that happening are going to be pretty slim, and that's probably going to be a team where maybe you'll see a duo, signed to an expansion team, or just, one of the existing teams already, but the chances of Runaway actually getting picked up as a full roster, just knowing how, they're going to be asking for a lot of money, and, we're hearing about teams cutting budgets, and, some things falling through, so, I'm just hoping the best for the players, but I would absolutely love to see them sticking together as the core, and, getting paired with Saya player would not be the worst thing in the world either.
No, that's an amazing prospect. We do know Runaway is getting, at least through the rumor mill, we know that Runaway is getting offers as a team and individuals and groups of players. It is likely to suspect that Florida is one of those teams making those offers. And a rebranding would be awesome because that would be way better than their current color scheme. But it would definitely invalidate the skins we've already bought. So that actually would be kind of cool because you have throwback season 1 skins, which I think this would be the fastest rebranding in a professional sport ever. Because usually teams wait 10 years before they start doing stuff. That would actually be pretty amazing. But yeah, I would love to see Florida pick up Runaway. And they're already leaning Korean, so just throw Runaway in with Tavik and Saya player, and you've got at least not bottom 2 team at that point, I would hope.
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard to not see them anywhere else. But anyway, so what we do know is that Zephyr is not the only Seoul Dynasty tank player to get traded and dealt to another team. So we also have Kuki, who has been traded to the Los Angeles Valiant. So this means that this marks the 3rd trade for the Dynasty in this offseason. Obviously, they traded for Fisher earlier in the offseason, and, who's better than Fisher? Well, Miro's not, Kuki's not, and maybe they just don't see a need to have a backup main tank, just knowing that they have Fisher. But anyways, Kuki, he played in 13 matches throughout the inaugural season for the Seoul Dynasty. He saw greater playing time during a final stage, where he was replacing Miro as the starting main tank in the last 7 matches of the season. But, kind of looking at, the bigger picture here, going to the Valiant, he's still going to be playing backup. In this case, he'll be behind Fate in the depth chart. And when you look at Fate, that's a player that only sat out during 1 map during the first season. So the playtime aspect is looking pretty narrow here when it comes to Kuki, at least from the outside perspective, just knowing that Fate has been one of the more consistent players, and just really in general, that Valiant frontline is one of the more consistent tank lines just across the league.
Yeah, I mean, this one did surprise me a little bit. Not so much that Seoul got rid of Kuki, but the fact that LA did pick him up for basically all the reasons you already mentioned. There is no world where I see Kuki starting over Fate unless Fate is ill or something like that. He's clearly a bench player. He's clearly a backup player. And maybe that's what LA was looking for. They just wanted someone to fill the bench, and Kuki's shown that while he may not be like starter material, he is a serviceable main tank. And I would actually put him above some of the other starters we saw in season 1, some of which that are no longer on a team. So I won't name names, but you can do the math. Some of them played for the San Francisco Shock. So, okay, that was almost naming names. But yeah, I mean, I actually think Kookie's a pretty good tank. And we've talked in the past how main tank is one of the harder roles to fill. So I think this was more a move of filling up the bench and kind of securing that tank for other teams not able to get him. So it's a little bit of hoarding half of the board in Monopoly so everybody else can't buy it. It's something like that. 900 IQ strats.
I mean, LA just in general are kind of known for that. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be winning in the playoffs. But that's besides the point. Moving on, we do have an update on the legendary Lucio emote that was released not too long ago. Initially this was part of the All Access Pass, only available to the holders of that, and they actually knocked down the emote in regards to the cost. So before the emote cost 300 Overwatch League credits, but now it is down to 200 credits. And if you were one of those players that purchased the emote for 300 credits prior, you're actually going to be getting a refund of 100 tokens back from Blizzard, although they did not set a timetable in regards to the refund. But that being said, I feel kind of conflicted with this stuff because, initially it was just part of the All Access Pass, and they're like, okay, you can buy it with, credits now, and now it's open to everyone. And, in the past, they've actually kind of done this with some of the promotional stuff as well when it comes to, say, like the... Oh, crap. The Oni Genji skin, they did the same thing.
Cop Diva.
The Cop Diva. So... it's weird that they're kind of like falling back on just kind of like retracting exclusives and just opening up later down the road. So, kind of takes away from some of the events that they have put in place. But, it is a really cool emote and more people are going to get it. So I guess I can't complain too much, but I feel like it just takes away some of the appeal of getting it initially if you can just go back and get it some other time.
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen the emote, they put a lot of assets into it. Like they put a lot of work into it. It's a phenomenal emote. It doesn't surprise me that they went this route, especially because they're effectively charging real money for it, because it is the Overwatch League tokens and not the in-game currency. So just a little bit extra way to make the struggling company that is Blizzard a little extra money to keep funding this operation. But I really didn't surprise me in the least. I think really what we're going to keep as our exclusives are like the gray Overwatch skins, which basically amount to recolors. And something like this, and in the future I think it's pretty safe to say that anything that they put a lot of time into, like Cop Diva, Oni Genji, Tyler G mentions Pink Mercy. I'm sure we will see that in boxes in the future. We're gonna see it in the future. Like they're not gonna hoard that stuff. It's just you don't put that amount of time in and then just write it off as an exclusive. It's the same reason they bring the skins back cheaper for events every year. Is they just want people to have it, but if you want to have it early, you pay a premium cost.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on, we do have our first expansion team sign in. This is going to Washington, D.C., who has been at the middle of all this rumor mill controversy. So if you've been on a competitive Overwatch Reddit, you've probably seen some of the posts. Or if you've been on Michael's Twitter or Kate Mitchell's, or just about anyone on Last Night's Leftovers, you can follow it. I'm sure a lot of people already have been. But DC is the first expansion team to make a player sign-in, and they have turned to a former New York Excelsior player, that being none other than the only man that was cut from NYXL, Janice. So on top of that, we also have the head coach sign-in for the team, also formerly of the New York Excelsior. So, serving as the team's head coach is none other than the Wizard himself, Wizard Hyun. So, that's a pretty big tandem right there. Very good first signing, just kind of like out of the gate, and it kind of like sets the tone for these expansion teams moving forward. But are you surprised that we've actually heard of a signing already, outside of like staffing, or is this not, too off the beaten path just because, we have heard a lot of like coaching updates, general managers, things like that so far?
Not really. When you see a lot of coaches and stuff leave teams in professional sports and in college sports and basically in sports in general, some players do tend to follow coaches just because they have good rapport with the coach or the coach likes them and maybe they feel like they couldn't use them. And I actually think that's probably what happened here is they probably signed these two in tandem, regardless of how the announcements look. They definitely signed these two in tandem, and Wizard must have saw something in New York's resident map thrower to really want to keep him on a team. And I say that, but I do want to be clear. I am joking. He is actually a very good tank. He is better. No. He is better than a lot of the tanks out there, and this goes back to our previous point of main tank is a hard role to fill. So Wizard must see something in him that he feels like he can work with. And knowing Wizard's track record and how he thinks about Overwatch, I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. Like I have to say, okay, you obviously know a lot more about this game than I do. You know way more about how the pro scene works than I do, and team strategies and all this stuff. Because he's a genius. Like just the way Wizard thinks about Overwatch at a fundamental level is very different than any other coach I've ever seen. Like if you watch any coach analyze what Wizard says about coaching, they're like, why? Like, and then they like sit there and break down. They're like, oh, that's why. There's a good video on Jane and Arrow talking about it. So if you go out and look for it, but I'm not surprised that we got to see a player signing. I feel like that's going to come very fast and furious over the next month. Not even next month, next half of the month, because these teams are going to want to put out who they signed, whether it's former Overwatch League players, former McDonald's employees. We're going to get a lot of announcements very quickly for these teams, and I think this is just the first crack in that floodgate.
Well, this also is very dependent on whether or not people are actually getting tryouts too. I mean, let's make that clear. And drama aside from DC, Wizard gives me hope that they are at least on the right track. And if he gets the structure behind him, I feel like we have a team that could actually be a contender. Now, if you believe the rumor mill, that structure may not be there, or it may be there and then suddenly taken away, depending on how you view offers. But we'll talk about that more at another time. But I think this is a good start for the Washington Monuments. Yeah, I mean, like, the free agency, how to say this? I don't like the infrastructure that they put in place for the free agency. There can be a lot of shady dealings, especially when it comes to signing, like, contenders, talent, or, organizations that have a spot in the Overwatch League actually hosting a tournament in China right now, which could potentially be scouting free agent sign-ins as well. I mean, it's, I know it's the first wave, first free agency period, but the way that they did it's kind of, I'm not gonna say that it's ass backwards, but it's kind of a thunker. So I'm hoping to see heavy improvements going into, season 3. But for now, this is a way to learn from their mistakes from this current window. But the expansion team signing window is going on right now, and that runs through October 7th. So, there's a good chance that, leading up to then, we are either going to get, little bits and pieces of these sign-ins, or, they'll just open the floodgates, and we'll have all the roster announcement videos, hopefully some videos that aren't, or graphics that aren't done on, like, MS Paint, something that actually looks professional would be fantastic, because, we already saw that, so, it can only improve from here, but, like, are you expecting us to get, like, little bits and pieces, or are you expecting the floodgates to open at one point when it comes to the announcements for these expansion teams and just, signings in general?
I think it really depends on the signing. Like, if we start to see full teams picked up, I think we're going to get the floodgate effect. Like, teams are going to start announcing, like, we signed Runaway, we signed, MVP Space, we signed, Optic Academy out from underneath of the Outlaws, stuff like that. But for higher profile players and staff, I think we'll get these trickle announcements. I think Washington wanted to get that foot out there. They're the first expansion team to really put out an announcement,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they wanted to be that. Like, they wanted to make a statement, like, we are making big moves early. Atlanta may be the next one to do that if certain rumors are to be believed. I believe that if it is true and everything comes to pass, that will be an announcement in and of itself.
Right.
But beyond that, I think it's going to be like kind of how the first season was. Like, we're going to hear bits and pieces, for the weeks leading up to it. And then once that roster deadline comes up, it's going to be like this, then this player, then this team, then this. And we're going to get a lot of big announcements. And then it's going to be nothing again until the next roster deadline comes in for the rest of the league. And honestly, that's the smart way to do it, because you don't want to play your hand too close, like too out in the open. You want to kind of keep it close to you. And I'm excited to see how the next couple of weeks go, but I just hope the spice continues. That's all I'm asking for. Come on.
Well, I mean, just given the current trajectory of how things have been laid out the past couple of days, I don't think the spice is going to be stopping anytime soon. And, we did have a pretty spicy trade that dropped earlier, which I'm pretty excited about because it does kind of fix one of the major needs of a certain team in particular. So we have a trade between the San Francisco Shock and the Houston Outlaws. So we have the Shock trading their DPS player Dante in exchange for Smurf from GG Esports Academy, which is a Houston Outlaws Academy team or affiliate team, depending on how you want to look at it. So sending Dante to Houston solves one of the Outlaws' issues in the inaugural season, and that was the fact that they had a lack of H-Racer specialists. And I know, technically, they had Clockwork, and yes, I was very hard on Clockwork for the right reasons, and he got reassigned, didn't really work. Then we went through the whole Linkser and Jake kind of like swapping back and forth with Tracer duties, and that didn't really work because Jake he did okay, but he wasn't great. And then, you had Linkser, who was your best Widowmaker player, also having to play Tracer, which wasn't ideal either. So it was a constant mess, and, Outlaws at times kind of, like, poked fun at it, saying, like, oh, yeah, we really don't have a problem, and to everyone, it was a glaring issue for that team, among some other things. And, we know that the Shock released Nomi earlier in the off-season, so they were in need of another main tank, and Smurf, when you look at his play in Contenders, he actually did very well in Contenders North America. That being said, GG Esports Academy, this was a team that got knocked out of Contenders by last night's leftovers. The one Contenders team that Ed and I fanboy over, for obvious reasons, because, sugar-free. But the Smurf was always one of the standout Winston players, so it does give them a pretty big threat on that role. And sure, he might not be the start-in main tank for the Shock, but this is a player that has a ton of room for growth here in the future, and, this is a win-win trade for both sides. But it is kind of interesting that, we see a trade for, an Overwatch League starter at times for someone that hasn't even played in the Overwatch League. So, it's kind of interesting to see that, in some aspects, Tier 2 and Tier 1 do collide in this case.
Yeah, actually, this really points to that flex spot we talked about many shows back now. I forget which show, but Smurf might actually end up on just flexing for him. So, but I do want to talk more about Dante. So they are kind of pegging this is where we are gonna put Dante in the tracer role, but more so the standout from Dante in season 1 was his Sombra.
Absolutely.
And Sombra is becoming more and more part of the meta. Now, whether that stays true until next January, who knows? I mean, we could be running, one tank, 5 DPS at that point. Like we don't know what these patches are going to do, but Sombra is becoming very important to the meta right now. Like we see her a lot in World Cup. We saw her a lot in Contenders, and the new Sombra is integral to that part. So when you take a look at the Outlaws, you say, okay, well, they have a few people that can play Sombra, but it's almost the same problem as Tracer. Like you don't want to put Linkser on Sombra because then you lose out on basically Linkser as a person. He's a high kill player. We don't know what the status of Jake is. Currently, Jake is a caster, so we don't know if he'll be coming back. They haven't made any announcements. They haven't made any, release.
Well,
notes.
I'm trying to remember where it was posted, but I remember someone on their staff posting, like, this looks like a really good roster. So, from the looks of it, it does seem like Outlaws aren't going to be making additional moves at this point. Now, that being said, that could always change, but I would imagine... just based off of that, Jake is going to be returning to the team as a player. But I would imagine that his playtime is going to be, I'm not going to say halved, but it's definitely not
diminished.
Going to be as prominent as it was in Season 1.
Yeah. And, I'm hesitant to peg Jake as coming back. Just because everything I've seen about him doing commentating, he seems to really be enjoying that. And a lot of the players have mentioned that season 1 for Overwatch League was a huge grind. So while Outlaws don't plan on releasing him, that's not really up to them. Like he is still in that period where he can opt out of his contract. That being said, I fully hope Jake comes back because I think Jake is a very important part to this team. And while his playtime may be diminished, he kind of has that Seagull factor. Like he's good for team morale. He's very smart, even if he never stops talking. And we've seen, like, if you've ever watched him stream, he has played with Dante on stream before, and they work really well together. Like their personalities seem to match really well. So I think this is a huge pickup for the Outlaws. I don't know if this is enough to fix their problems, because their problems kind of go a little bit beyond just needing a tracer at this point. But I think they are on the right track. And, there is a lot of off season left. Like honestly, if they can make 1 or 2 more pickups, that may be enough. And meta shift may be enough too, because I wasn't here last week, but we really undersold Raucus. Like we were not like on the Raucus train. And when he came out and played for the World Cup, we were like, oh wow, this is a completely different Raucus than we've used to seeing, because he's not on Zenyatta. So it kind of goes back to that, how much of a meta team is Houston. So I think they just need to meta-proof them. Yeah, I think they just need to meta-proof themselves a little bit better, and they will be by far a top tier team. Like they easily have the individual talent. They have shown to have the coaching staff. They just have a few holes that other teams were better at exploiting them. And plus they're fun to watch. I mean, I loved watching Houston. Like at the start of stage 4, when they brought out the solo tank Muma on Brigida and Linkser on Widow, we were like, what is this? And then they won with it. I mean, come on. Outlaws are just a fun team to watch.
Yeah, definitely. But, I am anxiously waiting, right, for, more, middle of the pack results from Houston. So I can drive that narrative that, their issues were far beyond just their lack of a tracer player, which we've talked about. And yes, like I will say, like the support line still is going to worry me. Will it look better in an Ana-driven meta? Yes. But we've seen him struggle on Zenyatta. We've seen him struggle during the Mercy meta when Bonnie was getting caught in self-destruct after self-destruct multiple times. But I really enjoy that they're at least trying to fix some of their immediate issues, but it's really just going to be a matter of whether or not the Outlaws can kind of escape the fact that they're very stage dependent so far, and with that also comes map dependent as well. So when it comes to Jake, I just want to know what sort of role is he going to be playing. Is he going to stick to being a quote Junkrat specialist when Junkrat for all intents and purposes, really hasn't seen a ton of play when it comes to a majority of the maps. We might see him on, Temple of Anubis on defense, and then maybe he'd swap over to Genji on the attack. But I feel like Jake is in a position where he's just going to be one of those players that is going to need to add additional heroes to his pool, because some of the heroes that he does have in his repertoire are not perceived meta heroes. And there are a lot of different players in the Overwatch League right now that are kind of in a similar position to Jake. So it really comes to a question of, if the meta shifts, is that going to drastically change, how they are perceived as a player? Or is this just going to be a sign of just how things are going to play out? Jake needs to have a niche, and I fear that Junkrat cannot be the answer.
No, what the future of Overwatch is going to come down to, and we're actually going to talk about it a lot in the Bangkok group stage, is flexibility. Flexibility is key in Overwatch, more so than it's ever been. We've kind of played up the narrative of this is a counter pick meta, and it's going to continue to be a counter pick meta, assuming Blizzard does their job right, which it seems like they're on the right track since the Mercy problem in stage 1. Right. Since then, their track record has gotten better, and it right now is probably the most diverse meta we've ever had. You can play anything into anything, but you're going to get countered, so you have to know how to counter your counters. And China showcased that. I mean, when you have multiple players on your team playing 5, 6, 11 heroes, that's what you're going to need, and that's why China had the results that they had. But we will talk about that right now.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead. Let's jump into our main discussions, technically. Let's take a look back at this last weekend's Overwatch World Cup group stage, which was, of course, in Bangkok, Thailand. So let's go through the results first, and then we'll kind of go through some of the standout moments, standout players, who advanced to BlizzCon, because it wasn't our picks. Well, at least in one case. But we open things off on Friday. So, Spider, what went down last Friday in the World Cup?
All right, so Friday, September 14th, if you missed it, it was Denmark defeating Thailand 3-1, Australia defeating Spain 3-1, China defeating Sweden 3-1, Denmark defeating Spain 2-1. Had to break that, I guess, 3-1, and then Australia defeating Thailand 4-0. Some pretty good games, but they were all pretty one-sided. Don't let the 3-1s fool you.
Yeah, so moving on to Saturday, day number 2, we had Denmark opening things up by defeating Australia 3-1. We had China defeat Thailand in a close series 3-2. Australia defeated Sweden 4-0. China got taken to another Map 5, this time against Denmark, but China did come out on top 3-2. And then to close out Saturday night, we saw Sweden defeat Spain 4-0. So a much needed win for Sweden. And they would continue that momentum going into day 3. So, Spider, what went down on Sunday?
So, Sweden did continue that momentum, and they defeated Thailand 3-1. China defeated Spain 4-0. Sweden then went on to defeat Denmark 3-2 in a very close game. China then went on to defeat Australia in a very close game 3-2. And then Thailand defeated Spain in a match that did matter, 3-1.
Okay, so that being said, quite a few map 5s throughout this World Cup group stage, more so than we're used to seeing. And, it's kind of interesting because going in, we felt like China was going to be a strong region. We figured that Sweden would put up a better performance than what they did. They definitely struggled pretty mightily early on, but they did gain some momentum towards the later end. But, going into Saturday when they got 4-0'd by Australia, that definitely kind of shut the door on their chances of advancing. So, the Swedes, unfortunately, will not be making it to BlizzCon because it was China coming out on top, going undefeated in this group stage, going 5-0. So they got the top seed, and then coming in second, it was the Aussies. So Australia finished 4-1, and I have to say, all in all, we figured that this group stage was going to be the closest contested one out of the lot, and it was absolutely the case. There were a lot of stand-up players, a lot of very close matches, some that were even upsets when you consider that, Denmark did defeat Australia 3-1, and Denmark was one of those teams that, a lot of, we didn't really know what to expect from Denmark. They had a lot of contenders, EU talent, and Denmark really came to play in really, all of their series. They look like a pretty stellar team across the board. But that being said, Spider, out of this past weekend's matches, which ones do you think are, the must-watch ones for those that did miss the matches?
Honestly, you can go back and watch any of the 3-2 matches. They put on a good show. The standouts for me were definitely a couple of the Sweden games. China, most of the China games were the standouts. The big one was China versus Australia at the end of the weekend. But China versus Thailand was one that comes to mind just because of what we saw out of Thailand, not so much out of China. And then the battle for the EU region, the Sweden versus Denmark, was definitely a must watch, because you got to see two very different styles of EU play clash against each other. Mm-hmm. And it was just fun to watch. Overall, this was the death group, because going into it, you could honestly say that any of these teams really had a fighting chance, except for maybe Spain, and their results kind of show that. But outside of that, it was kind of one map here, one map there, and honestly, that's almost what it came down to, was a few different maps. If something would have went 3-2, if something instead didn't go 4-0, we could have a different second seed. That being said, China was very, very dominant.
Yeah, and it was pretty cool seeing we did have pretty high stakes going into that Sunday, because that China versus Australia match would determine who would be the top seed out of that group stage, and who would have the possibility of drawing South Korea when we get to the top 8. But yeah, definitely Denmark. I had the most fun watching the Denmark matches. Now, that being said, China, I was very happy to see China perform the way that they did. And of course, time and time again, they brought up the narrative of, the general audience is used to expecting one thing just because of the fact that, Shanghai did finish a winless season in the inaugural season. And then, China just comes out, and while sure, they were, brought to a Met 5 on a couple of these situations, but we saw so much flexibility in China's DPS. It was one of the craziest things I have seen. And, you talked about how important, counter picks are and how deep the hero pools need to be. And I know there were a couple of players on the Chinese roster in particular that really stood out in that aspect that you wanted to talk about. One of them being a player that had not played in the last 10 months, that, of course, being Leave. So, we saw a lot of stuff from Leave, but just how many heroes did we see getting pulled out of his repertoire for this World Cup group stage?
There were certain matches where he played up to 11 heroes for significant amount of time. We're not talking 10 seconds or 4 seconds to switch to stall. Like when he switched to a character, he would stay on that character for at least a decent amount of time. And he was extremely, extremely functional on all of them, if not highly deadly. China as a whole, like their 3 DPS players were all like mix and match. It was basically like, okay, well, I'm already playing McCree, so you play Brigida, or okay, you're playing McCree, I'll play Widowmaker. Like it was basically like, okay, who's gonna play McCree this round? Who's gonna play Pharah? Okay, well, let's switch to Genji. Okay, well, let's run Hammond now. Like it was just off the wall crazy. Like the only other team that had that level of flexibility was Thailand. They just weren't as good at it. Like Thailand kind of had a few set strategies that they would mix and match. But China absolutely like executed it to the T. Like when they saw a counter pick come out, they would make a change immediately. And it didn't matter who made that change. They were just that good. So it did take a lot of people by surprise. Now, if you followed the Chinese scene like we have in the past, you kind of know that they're like the resident sleeper. Like they have really good players. It's just Shanghai messed it up. And if you take anything away from it, do not base China's talent pool on Shanghai, because any region can have a Shanghai if you mess it up. Just look at Spain this weekend. Spain didn't win a match, and they looked bad doing it. So, it just goes to show that with the right level of talent, you could do it. And we will talk about Leave extensively, probably in our actual like breakdown of Australia versus China, because that's kind of like our marquee match. But I do also want to touch on Crystal. Crystal was also very good. Like he didn't flex around as much, but he still played 6 heroes, so he still flexed around more than what you would expect a DPS to. And he was good on all of them. Like he would bring out Pharah and he would be deadly. He would bring out McCree and look just as good as Leave. Like it takes that level of synergy. Like gone are the days, at least in my eyes, of the hit scan specialist and the projectile specialist. You kind of need people that can at least fill some of those characters competently so you can mix and match them. And, we're going to start seeing more and more of these weird strategies like Thailand holding with triple dive tank on defense on Anubis. And it worked really well because the enemy team can't get through the door. And if they do, they've already wasted all their ults. They're already half dead. And then the team's just coming back and killing them again. So, and China did stuff like that in multiple matches. Like they spawn camped. Who was it? It was on Kings Row. They spawn camped literally I think it might have been Australia, like literally in their spawn in Kings Row for like 2.5 minutes until finally Australia said, okay, we've had enough of this. And they literally just like stunned Guzu into a corner and then finally killed him. And that's when they finally got to start their push again. Like I am excited to see where this meta goes. And China, I think, was the first team to really embrace that flexibility.
Yeah, and it's so interesting when you compare China to, the rest of the regions that we have seen, because yes, we have seen, a fair amount of McCree, but we haven't seen 3 different players on the same team be able to play that level of McCree consistently. Like, they were just so interchangeable, and China, when you look at that region in particular, McCree is very popular in that region, so there are times where it's just going to throw people off, but, like, all 3 of their DPS players were extremely seasoned, and, Leave just being able to perform the way that he did after, just not being on a team and really playing competitively in 10 months really speaks volumes to the amount of talent that he has. And, Gu Shui, the main tank on that team, there is no way this guy is not going to get picked up for one of these expansion teams. He was just an absolute force and menace on the Winston. I absolutely loved just really everything about what we saw out of China. But looking at some of the other teams, Thailand was another one of those teams that did show a lot of flexibility in their hero pool. We had Tita Watt, who was their main tank. He showed quite a bit of flexibility. His Winston was doing pretty good. Patafan showed a lot of flexibility as well, and we got to see quite a bit of Reaper play from him, which I love to see. With Australia, you had Huss, who, his Widowmaker looked very damn good. He played a ton of Sombra. Punk, who has been one of the contender standouts in Australia. Again, one of the more consistent D.Va players, in this group stage. And, Denmark just across the board was pretty surprising, but I feel like Shreks definitely had a breakout performance, on the DPS role for that team in particular, but there was just so much talent, in this group stage, that, I definitely felt like there were players that had bigger impacts in this group stage as opposed to some of the other ones, but, with how close everything was, like, there were a lot of players that had their moments, and it was just really great to see. So, this is a very good opportunity for some of these players to get picked up. And I definitely feel like, these Chinese expansion teams, they definitely have something to kind of look at again and hopefully get it right this time.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you can't base their talent pool off of what we saw out of Shanghai. Now, you touched on a lot of the big ones, like standout players. Trill for Australia was also a very good tank. He had the most watched clip of the weekend, where he literally gets spoofed off the ledge by a Brigida right as the caster says he's one of the best tanks in the world. Funny moment, like just off the wall, just bad luck. Because he goes to swing his Hammond and then just gets booped off the ledge, like right as he attaches the thing. It's funny. Go watch it. Manitin actually put up a pretty good show. Like, Sweden had its struggles, but Manitin still was pretty consistent. Like, I feel like there is a spot at least on a tier 2 team, if not an Overwatch League team, for Manitin.
That is Manitin's kind of MO, really. He was Mr. Consistency when he was on the Florida Mayhem, so
exactly,
really can't be too much of a surprise.
he is a great player that I feel like just keeps getting put in bad situations. And I'd like to see him shine with a better main tank. Sorry, Reinforce. Like, you had some problems this weekend, but you did good. You did good. And the last one was Apudo from Thailand. He was probably my standout Sombra for the weekend. Like, the problems Thailand had nothing to do with their DPS 9 times out of 10. Like, their DPS was executing. It was literally like they were either just mispositioned, or, I hate to say it, Mickey was in the wrong spot or going too ham on Brigida. And then every time Mickey got on D.Va, it just looked bad. So Apudo, I definitely think, has room to be picked up by somebody. I want to see him in a more structured roster. But yeah, I mean, all of China, I can name all of China. Like, Shy was really good. A Kraken was amazing. Like, a Kraken was my standout Ana, because like anytime a Pharah would just open, try to take open sky against him, just gone.
Zero room at all.
that was the funny part about China, was they were like, oh, we can run a McCree to counter the Pharah. And they're like, no, Kraken's got it. He's good. So, like, half the time, McCree was, like, flanking and doing other stuff. Like, he wasn't even dealing with the Pharah. So, overall, it was... There were a lot of standout players. Like I said, go back and watch any of the 3-2 matches. But if you're very tight on time, Australia versus China is the big one. And we will walk you through that one.
Absolutely. So Australia versus China opened up on Nepal. So this one went 3 rounds. So in round 1, we saw CKM on the Pharah. Really struggled early on to find the sight line, just, to rain the rockets down. But we do see a Bionade open the door for Australia to flip the point. And we see Trill come in, finding a double kill as he has the Primal Rage going with the Nano Boost, which is a combo we've been seeing a lot more lately, especially in the World Cup. But China is able to push back after Husk falls, which forces, some composition changes from Australia. So Leave gives China more time by finding Trill with a Riptire, and China ends up closing out the round. Going into round 2, we had Australia looking to spam down the Goats composition from China, and they invested the Farah Barrage as well as the Riptire, which allowed Australia to flip the point. And then, Leave just comes in on McCree and just takes over. But something that CKM did was he predicted China's rotations quite a bit, which kind of forced China away quite a bit. We do see tank ultimates being invested by Australia, and the Nano Winston closes out the round for Australia, which forces us to a round 3. So we see a lot of resources being put on Leave with the McCree, trying to just pocket him, essentially. We see Husk looking to take him out with the Widowmaker, just trying to get that instant pick or, just whittle down the tank line that is protecting him. Leave ends up going pretty flank happy on McCree. And it pays huge dividends multiple times. He ends up investing the Deadeye, which finds Australia's Pharmacy comp. And China doesn't have to heavily rely on using their ultimates just to keep Australia back, and China ends up taking round 3 very decisively. So, we talk about the McCree play from China quite a bit. Leave definitely was catching them off guard, especially with the positioning, and that's not something that we always get to see with McCree play. So were you surprised to see Leave going for these consistent flank routes, especially in this round?
Not really. Flank McCree isn't as popular in most regions, but I know he's very popular in China, and he's very, very effective because a lot of people underestimate the tilt factor that a flank McCree can bring, because 1 or 2 flanks from a flank McCree and you are pissed off and you are mad, and then you start playing dumb. But as good as that was, Gushui was or Gushu, or I don't know how to say that.
I'm pretty sure it's Gushui.
Gushui was the linchpin in this team for this, these 3 maps. He only died 4 times this whole map series. So that's almost just 1 every map. It's 1.3 every map. So that's ridiculous for a main tank. You would expect those numbers out of a diva who can just say, "Oh, we lost, I'm gone." But you don't expect that out of a Winston. So he pulled so many of Australia's resources that it left room for Leave to do his thing. It left Leave to do the flank routes. And we already talked about the flexibility, and that came in full force. Anytime Australia tried to do something, China would just counterpick them and bully them. The only thing that really happened was the second map. They didn't quite deal with CKM enough, and that let them kind of run wild. But as the night goes on, the less and less they deal with CKM, the more problems they have. And then the very last match, they say, "Okay, we need to take care of this." And then suddenly China just dominates. So I don't know if they wanted to make it look close or they just forgot about him for a while. But as a whole, China outplayed them in almost every role.
Yeah, that is something that I want to talk to you about when it comes to dealing with the triple tank, triple support lineup that we did see from China. So Australia went for the more spammy variation of the counter where, they paired Junkrat with Farah, which can be kind of problematic at times, especially if the triple tank is running Zarya, because that does feed a lot of energy and charge to the Zarya in particular. But, we've also seen, a lot of Doomfist coming out to kind of deal with the 303. Which variation of these counters do you prefer to see from these teams? Do you like the more spammy variation, or would you prefer to see a Doomfist in that situation?
I think you just need to play to your team's strength. Personally, I like the Doomfist. I feel like Doomfist is very good against tank-heavy comps. As long as they're not running a Roadhog, which most teams aren't at this point, Doomfist can do a lot of work in tanks and make it very hard for them to run the goats style. That being said, the Pharah Junkrat on certain maps is very strong because they just have ult. You either have one or both ultimates every fight, and there's not much the enemy team can do to punish that unless they specifically start swapping to counter you, and by then you have the ult advantage. There are pluses and minuses. I like the Doomfist, but not a lot of teams have a competent Doomfist, so they're gonna opt to go the spam route, and that's basically what we saw out of Australia. Is they opted to go the spam route because they didn't feel comfortable running the anti-goats, Sombra Doomfist type of style play. Moving forward, I feel like we're going to get away from the spam comps because there are some pretty big holes in that comp. And you see China, you are not China, but you saw it a few times this weekend that teams went spam comp and they got punished heavily for it. Whereas the Doomfist Sombra or the Doomfist and another DPS can still do work even if they're being countered as long as they position correctly. So I am curious to see where it goes from here, but like I said, personally, I think the Doomfist opens more possibilities and kind of future-proofs you. Plus, Doomfist into any comp can do work as long as he's trading one for one. Mm-hmm. And we actually saw it a lot with Hydration when he played Doomfist. Like, he would literally jump in the back line and kill one of the supports. And if he got one of them, he put his team at a major advantage because once they've lost their main support or even their off support, it's much harder for that team to make a push. So I just like Doomfist better. And that's not just because I've been playing a lot of Doomfist.
Yeah, I hear you on that. But anyways, moving on to map 2, we would go on to King's Row. So China chose to attack first. So we saw CKM building a quick Riptire against China's triple tank composition. We see a Kraken getting dove on, but Huss ends up coming up with a big 3k to turn the fight for Australia. China does manage to get positional advantage on a point and wins the frontline battle to secure the first objective. So this is where we see Leave finding some openings in the streets phase. And, China doesn't really have a whole lot of time to complete the map. They had like a minute 15, something like that. We see Trill get in nano boosted on a Winston, which pushes China back. And this one kind of ends kind of anticlimactic because China does, C9, which, you still hate to see whenever it does happen. So going to the Australia attack, we see a heavy investment being brought in for the Nanoblade. And that nets 0 kills for Australia, but what it does do is it forces China back, which allows Australia to get positional advantage on the point, and they end up getting 2 ticks on the point. We see Gushue falling, and Australia ends up getting that final tick on the next engage. This is where we see Shy swapping over to the McCree, one of 3 McCree players on this Chinese roster. So he's really just looking to contest the Sombra and the Pharah combo from Australia. So Huss ends up being the first to fall, and China gets hyper aggro in this case. And, Australia getting pushed to spawn, and then we see Huss on the Sombra looking to back cap, so he ends up, just trying to split the attention of China. China does end up overextending. We do see CKM getting taken out of the sky, who was on the Pharah, and Punk is basically the last one standing on the point, and China is able to clear the cart to take a 2-0 lead going into halftime. But, momentum would shift in the later half of this series.
Yeah, outside of that spawn camp, though, Australia actually should have won this map because as a whole, they were playing better than China on this map. They just kind of got stalled out a little too long and kind of took the slow roll approach a little too much to heart. And that cost them a lot more time than they really, could afford. And then China made a few key picks here and there. Gushue stayed alive a lot longer than he should have at certain points. It's just overall, I would put this more on the back of Australia failing than China succeeding. But overall, it was a really good match to watch. And if you want to see like old school selfless style spawn camping, this is the map to watch because that part was fun to watch. Because like I said, it literally took them until they they had to stun Gushui into a corner as Winston to get him to die, because otherwise, every time they almost would kill him, he'd just be gone. And then he would come right back full health and just start bullying them again.
Absolutely. So, moving on to map 3, we would go to Temple of Anubis. So, Australia, they were on the attack first, and early on, they struggled to get past the choke point. We see Crystal on the Genji finding quite a few key picks early on, and Australia does end up capturing the first point following the EMP initiation, so they have 4:45 left on the clock. And, Crystal, again, coming in the clutch here on the Genji, ends up getting a 3k Dragon Blade, which helps prevent the snowball from happening. So, we do see Punk doing a good job at intercepting Yvette's Mercy, and Australia ends up getting a take out of that. China is able to fend off the attack, but Australia is able to swarm the point, following 2 opening picks by Huss. So Australia ends up getting a second tick, but they fail to complete the map. And then China, on their attack, early entries, really not finding the value. And there's a moment where China was split up. You had Crystal and Late Yun, who were on the, way in the back, behind the first point, which, not so hot. You had CKM, who was on a Junkrat, basically just holding on to his Riptire because he knew that, they had sight lines, so they knew that they were 2 behind enemy lines. And China is basically just running out of time. There's only 30 seconds left on the clock. And Crystal, he draws the Dragon Blade, doesn't get the value out of it, and ends up falling, and China isn't able to get the Resurrect off. We see Huss finding Shy with a headshot, and Australia are able to get the full hold. So you want to talk about a shift of momentum. Getting a full hold, pretty damn good way to get back in the fight.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like Australia's attack was okay. They had their problems, but again, they took that slow roll approach, and I honestly think again that cost them completion of the map. Like they kind of took things a little too slow and steady. Like they weren't as aggressive as they should have been at times. But if you want like a clinic of like Temple of Anubis defense, this is it. Like there is a reason Widow Junkrat is so popular on Temple of Anubis, and they showed you why. Because basically what Junkrat does is he just spams you till you're out of position, and then the Widowmaker takes advantage. So if you actually go and look at the stats, the Junkrat stats aren't that great, but Huss stats are insane because he was just taking full advantage of all the missed positions and all the bad routes that they had to take. He actually racked up about 15.4 kills per 10 minutes in a 5-minute match. So that should really tell you something. 4 minutes and 30 seconds for you really paying attention out there. But yeah, this was what they needed. Like they were struggling. They just came off of a bad map because, like I said, from me watching it, I could tell you that they made some bad calls on the previous map, and internally they know that they made those bad calls. So they needed something to kind of remotivate them, and a full hold is the way to do it, especially on Anubis, because the casters say it. But Anubis can go one of 2 ways. It's either full hold and the team gets a tick, or one team pushes and then they full hold like we see here, or it goes to like 7 or 8.
Yeah, like 3-minute attacks. Just
exactly.
back and forth. But anyways, so this would go to map 4, which was played on Rialto. Australia, again, on the attack. And Crystal early on is just being an absolute menace on the back line. But CKM is able to turn things. With the barrage is really getting max value here for Australia. And on Rialto, Australia's dive was just picking China apart. We see Trill looking to continue that momentum, ends up finding 2 opening picks, but Crystal answers right back with a 2k of his own. So this is where we see Huss swapping over to the Widowmaker for the second point to deal with the Pharah now, and we see Punk coming in over the top, gets a massive 3k self-destruct, which allows Australia to reach that second point. And then this is where China's defense, they take control of the archway. Trill ends up getting punished for diving too deep. CKM goes for the barrage, but ends up getting slept. So, taken right out of the sky, and China is just able to clear the cards. So Australia not able to finish Rialto, which isn't the biggest deal because a lot of teams have been struggling on completing that map completely. So China on the attack next. We see Crystal getting pressured early on by a Kraken's Anna, and, Crystal was on the fair in this case, and, we already talked about how a Kraken was doing such a good job at, just taking away the space. Obviously, on Rialto, the Anna player in this situation has, very long sight lines, and there's a reason why, snipers are pretty prominent on this map, and that's because of those sight lines. We see Huss dropping the EMP, but Late Yun is actually kept alive via the nano boost, and the sustain is enough for China to just get back in the fight, which does end up resulting in a team kill. Trill ends up getting caught on the wrong side of the map, but we do see Australia regrouping. Huss is coming alive on the Widowmaker, and this is where he's starting to really start to just click heads. He's finding consecutive headshots. This was really like when Huss was just kind of his own entity at this point for Australia. We do see China go for some late swaps at roughly 20 seconds left on the clock, so a little bit too late for them to make those swaps in particular, but they do try to go dive to just deal with Huss, and Trill ends up finding both of the Chinese supports in overtime, and time runs out. So this would, of course, force a map 5, and I'm pretty sure it was in this series that one of the tanks got booped off of one of the bridges and ends up falling into the boat. And, the boat saves his life. So, man, that always makes me nervous when I see environmental things on Rialto, because there's always that chance that something like that could come into play. So RNGesus, he took the wheel, saved that tank's life, and he got back into the fight. So, it doesn't always work out that way, but when it does, you're happy to see it.
Mm-hmm. When you get booped into the car lane in Oasis, and you're like, oh man, I'm dead, and then you're like, oh, there's no cars coming in, and you just slowly walk back to the mega health pack, and then you get booped again and die. But this time it did work out for him. But this was like the leave show. This match was the leave show, and he basically kept China in this round. But as we've come to see, that teamwork will always trump individual performance, and that's basically what Australia did. That being said, I do want to point out that the China defense, I think it was China's defense. Yeah, China's defense at the end with the doubles was disgusting. They just outpositioned them so well, and they played double. I've never seen the double sniper get played. Is they weren't really controlling sight lines as you would normally expect with double sniper. They were literally just, okay, we're gonna flank together and we're just gonna kill them. It was weird to see, and I think Rialto is the only map you can really get away with it on third point, because there's so many parallel side hallways that you can kind of come around and both have really good sight lines. But man, that was fun to watch, because we actually don't see a lot of double sniper used except for some very specific points. And when we do, we see it in that traditional double sniper, okay, set up a crossfire, the base level double sniper strategy. So that was actually really fun to watch. And just watching Huss click on heads, it was boom, dead, boom, dead, boom, dead. It was phenomenal. But I don't want to take anything away from Australia, because Australia's attack was very well coordinated, and they really put that. I've been kind of hard on them about that slow roll strategy, but they did the slow roll strategy again, but they put a little hustle behind it, and that made the difference. So, that's what kind of got them to this map win.
But unfortunately, on Control did not turn out so hot for Australia. So map 5, the tiebreaker was on Lijiang Tower. So this one was a 2-0 victory in favor of China. So in round 1, we saw Crystal locked onto the McCree. Ends up finding a 2K. Follow-up after Trill is the first to fall. We see Australia making some early swaps, so they switch to McCree and Anna Brigitte. We see Late Young getting dropped low, but he does end up getting pocketed healed to full. Sky ends up doming Huss, which forces the Resurrect, and Crystal just comes in with a 3k with a Deadeye, and he ends up getting a follow-up kill on Punk after Punk's defense matrix runs out of juice. So we see Australia flipping a point at 99%, but, with control, that's one fight territory, needless to say, and holding onto the point for 100 seconds, not the easiest thing to do. So Late Yun ends up finding 2 supports with the self-destruct, and Australia is not able to touch the point to force the overtime, so China taking round 1. And then in round 2, we see China bringing out the GOATs. This was on control center. We see Sky early on pressuring CKM, and he ends up getting caught out late. China is just doing a great job at controlling the doorway, so not giving Australia really an entry point at this point. CKM does sneak around the back, which does force China to respond. So, there's a back cap attempt, and, that doesn't really work out. We do see the teams trade in on the point at this point, and then a late barrier is invested by China, and that does secure them the fight. So we see Gushui charging Custa, pitting him up against the wall, and we see the stall pick starting to come out from Australia. CKM ends up getting caught with the self-destruct, and Australia gets caught in the Graviton Surge, which allows China to secure the round, win the map, and eventually walk out with the top seed of this group stage. So China finishing 5-0, and really it was just... Definitely control was more dominant compared to some of the other match types, but all in all, a very close series across the board, and, this is probably not the 2 teams that we would have expected. We did see teams overperform, some teams drastically underperform to what we would expect, but the group of death delivered, and, what else can you ask for with this group stage? There was so much to love with this one.
No, this is by far my favorite stage, even though I did like the US group stage, because, USA and Canada duked it out. Yeah, this was definitely the closest one outside of Spain. Like I said, this could have went very differently based on a couple of different maps outside of the top seed. I will say that China's, and I led with this, so I'm kind of going with this. China's flexibility is what brought them that 5-0, and as long as they can keep that moving forward, I feel like they have a pretty good shot. They're going to obviously have some problems when they start running into more experienced teams like US, like Korea, the elephant in the room. But I feel like they at least put on a showing good enough that they could reasonably be expected to at least have a chance.
Right. And they have all of their visas, by the way.
Yep.
So there is that.
That was the next thing I was going to touch on, is we know we are going to get this team, unlike, previous times and various other teams. So I just had fun. Like, I missed a lot of these matches real time. I got to watch, the first day and a little bit of the second day. So I actually went back and watched most of the matches over the past few days, and I was sad that I missed them live, because as I was watching them, I was like, oh man, this is really good. And then like Denmark would come on, I'm like, oh, Denmark, all right, I'll skip through this game. And then I started watching, I was like, wow, Denmark's really good. And then Sweden would come on, and I'm like, oh, come on, I expected better of you guys, but you're still doing really good. Like, you not the first day, but after that, they had some good moments. And I've picked on Reinforce, but for somebody who hasn't played professionally going into the main tank role, it's very different than when he left the scene. So he actually did relatively well. Like, I will not put Sweden's failure solely on him. Like, they had problems all around.
Yeah, you really can't count the talent takedown.
And honestly, outside of Manitin, like, there are things all wrong with Sweden. So overall, not the 100% the way we expected it, but I'm not disappointed in the outcome. Like, Australia has always, outside of that first year, like last year, they were kind of that team that surprised us, like that they did so well. So this year, I had hopes that they would do well, but then when I saw the group they got put in, I was like, oh man, that's going to be a tough group to get out. So it wasn't necessarily, selling them short. It was just like, okay, the other teams obviously have better players, and then I still sold them short. I know to kind of trust in Australia a little bit more. But that being said, there was nothing I saw this week that gives me confidence that they can beat Korea, and that's what I do for this World Cup. This World Cup is who can beat Korea, and right now the only two teams that I think can still beat Korea even after this weekend are U.S. or Canada. So I have hope for China, but I'm still not 100% sold on them because they kind of leaned too much into the individual play. Like there wasn't a lot of what I would consider high team coordinated strikes. So we'll see. Like I'm curious to see how the seeding plays out, but I just hope US doesn't pull South Korea first again.
That would definitely be the thing. But anyways, we do have another Overwatch World Cup group stage coming this weekend. This one being the final one, so we'll know the final two teams joining the top 8. On this one being held in Paris, France. So with that being said, we're gonna go ahead. We'll look at the teams. We have obviously the host team, France. We have Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Poland, and the United Kingdom. So, France, last year, they finished in 4th place. This is basically, the team formerly known as Rogue, who kind of had their swan song last year. Then, you add on a couple of pieces. You have Poco from the Philadelphia Fusion. You have Ben Best, who is one of the tanks over into EU contenders. And United Kingdom, they have 5 returning players from last year's team. This is a team that I feel like a lot of the community undermines for whatever reason. So that being said, this definitely appearing to be one of those group stages that has 2 heavy favorites, right? France, United Kingdom, more than likely are going to be the top 2 teams to round out that top 8. And when you look at the other teams, there are definitely a lot of unknown players. There's not a lot of players that are being pulled from the tier 2 scene or contenders. There might be like 1 or 2 players max per, team in this regard, but Spider, just kind of like looking at the landscape, obviously you got the 2 powerhouses. Who do you think ultimately will walk out with that top seed out of this group stage?
Barring any major upsets, I'm confident that it's going to be France and United Kingdom. I feel like this is very reminiscent of the first week in the Overwatch World Cup, where we kind of knew what the results were going to be. We didn't quite know the exact scores, but like you said, there's not a whole lot of talent on these rosters that we're familiar with. I mean, Poland has a team made up of no tier 2 players, no Overwatch League players, like just overall like unknowns. Whereas, when you look at a team like France, you have Rogue, you have Poco, you have Wins, who
will be playing in a Lucio meta. What?
Yeah, exactly. Like he definitely picked the right time to come back. And then you have United Kingdom, which while it's not made up of necessarily a lot of high tier players, like Boombox is really the only like Overwatch League pro, there is a lot of well-known players that have a track history of being very good, like Christopher, who was one of the standout tanks, Kib, Mikey A. You have a lot of players that you kind of can say like, yes, they deserve to be in the World Cup. So, barring like something crazy happening, I don't see this going any other way than France first, United Kingdom second, and then the other teams just fighting for the bottom.
Yeah, That's a problem with group stages. I'm expecting a lot of 4-0s this weekend. I want to see France do well, but there's always that part of me that is going to be concerned, just because, Rogue was always one of those teams that were defined by the dive meta. We haven't seen Rogue compete since Brigitte came into the fold, so who knows what looks we're going to be seeing out of France this year. So I'm very intrigued to see it. But that being said, being there at the World Cup last year, just seeing Rogue compete, live on the stage was, just very surreal since I was a very big Rogue fan. So I still think Rogue, or, France in this case, will come out on top. But I don't want anyone sleeping on the United Kingdom. That has been happening a lot. You have a lot of talent on the UK. A lot of the reunited boys, you got Keep, you got Cruz, you got Boombox. You have a lot of players on this team that were part of Reunited, E-United, We United, Reunited. Whatever iteration of Reunited it was, a lot of these players were on one of those formations at one given time. But that being said, there is talent out there in regards to players that you should probably be keeping an eye on. So, Spider, is there anyone in particular that you're going to be keeping an eye on this weekend?
I mean, let me see who jumps out at me. Obviously, there's a lot of the people on the France roster, like Soon and AKM. I'll be curious. I'm actually very curious to see how France plays. Like, looking at the roster, they have Soon, AKM, and Nico. So you can almost bet that it's going to be Nico in and then rotating between Soon and AKM. I'm curious to see how Wins does. Not having played, we've seen that can go both ways. Honestly, the big one that I want to see is the person I mentioned earlier, is Christopher. He was one of my standout tanks, and he was always one of the tanks that I could never figure out why he wasn't on a team, because whenever he played Reinhardt, he was always one of the most consistent Reinhardts that I ever watched. He was aggressive when he needed to be. He was very defensive when he needed to be. So I don't know if maybe it's just that Reinhardt was his only hero and he wasn't as good of a Winston, because, like, thinking back, I don't really remember him playing Winston. So I either haven't seen it or it wasn't good enough for me to remember it. So I'm really curious to see how he does, because, again, main tank is a hard role to fill. Mm-hmm. And if he does really well, we'll be seeing a lot more of him. So he is the one I absolutely want to watch. And Poland, like, I'm just curious about Poland. Like, I mean, obviously we don't know any of these players, so I'm curious if this is going to be like a breakout story if Poland has like sleeper talent, or they're just going to Spain it up again. Other than that, Nesh would be like my last pick. He is he's always fun to watch. Like, I've watched him stream a few times. I watched him play on the Hurricanes. He is just consistently fun to watch. So there's a lot of people you can watch.
Yeah, for me, I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on Kodak. That is the flex support player on Germany. He formerly played for Snakes. Obviously, France. There are a lot of players to watch in France. I'm really not going to be talking about that. But I do want to see how Wince is going to do in this meta. If he's going to be up to his, tweet-in shenanigans on the payload, anything like that, because you never know. Italy is an interesting one for me, too. Minda has been a pretty decent tank for We Have Org. And then you have Carnifex. And this is a player that has been around the scene for as long as I can remember, dating all the way back to 2016. Carnifex was a DPS player on, at one point, Flat Earth, which is one of the kind of like OG teams, and he played with Artier, who was one of the really standout McCree players way back in the beta days. So I want to see if Carnifex is still playing at a similar level as to what he was playing in 2016. So for me, like, he's going to be the player that I'm going to be watching the closest, just because he has been around for quite some time, and we have seen kind of a kind of a falling off of some of these players that have been around at that level for quite some time, especially at the highest level of play. So Netherlands, I'm looking at Facility. This is a projectile DPS player. He's been in contenders for, quite some time. He played on Orgulus in Hungary. Most recently, he was playing for Toronto Esports, which is the Boston Uprising Academy team. And, you mentioned Poland. Donye is probably going to be the standout player in that team in particular. This is a DPS player that has been known to flex both on hit scan and projectile characters. He played for Bazooka Puppies as well as most recently on Copenhagen Flames. So for me, those are going to be the players I'm going to be watching. Obviously, some of these players might have a little bit more opportunities to really show their stuff than some of the others, just based off of the team strengths and whatnot. But there's going to be talent out there, but, it's just a matter of who's going to come to play, really, because you never know. Like, it could be a surprise. Maybe one of these teams is going to pull a Denmark and just completely shock the hell out of you and only, miss out by, one map. You never know, but it does look like UK and France are primed to round out that top 8 going into BlizzCon.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where the World Cup goes from here. I hope they update the patch so that we get a little bit newer of a patch, because you actually mentioned this earlier, and I wanted to bring it up and I forgot, so I'm going to bring it up now. The Winston Primal Nano combo is so popular on Overwatch World Cup right now because Winston is broken. There's actually a bug with Winston that his leap does the full amount of damage regardless of where you are in the radius. Normally, it's very similar to Hammond's, or I guess you could say Hammond's is very similar to Winston's. So Winston came first, is the further you are away from the epicenter, the less damage you take. Well, right now, it's broken on the patch that they're playing on the World Cup. So you take that full damage regardless. So what you do is you nano the Winston, and then he just repeatedly Mario jumps on top of them. And that's what you see. You see Winston's getting a lot of jump pack kills because they can do that every 2 seconds. So I hope going forward we get a new patch, because I feel like that's kind of a little cheesy, but we don't see a lot of teams fully taking advantage of it. But yeah, looking at it right now, moving forward, we will see Australia, China, Canada, US, Finland, South Korea, most likely France and UK. So it's going to be a pretty stacked World Cup. And Sweden's not going to be there. So here.
I guess I can't pack that jersey.
Yeah, I mean, who's Squid going to root for this year then?
Well, it's going to have to be the US at this point.
Yeah, but I'm excited. The closer and closer we get to BlizzCon, the more and more excited I am, and it's that way every year. In World Cup has just consistently gotten better since its first iteration. So I am fully on board to see the BlizzCon hype train.
It'll be
I just
here.
won't see it in person.
Yeah, unfortunately. It'll be here before you know it, though. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and close out the show. Man, words are hard. So anyways, if you guys... Yeah, that is a thing. If you want to show some support for the show, one of the best ways to do that is to leave us a positive review over on iTunes. We're always looking for ways to improve the show and just make for a better listening experience for you guys. And quick announcement, this was announced earlier today. You might have seen me tweeting about it on multiple Twitter accounts, but if you missed it, and you're watching right now, you will know all about something that is happening at BlizzCon, and that is Con Before the Storm. So, Con Before the Storm returns on November 1st from the Hilton, Anaheim. So be sure to check out this amazing community event if you are going to be there at BlizzCon, or if you're, just in the Anaheim area, because this is a free party. They do have a meet and greet. They have an awesome art gallery, and of course, there is, this little thing called World of Podcasts. And with that being said, the Overwatch panel at World of Podcasts is going to be from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. on the 4th floor of the Hilton Anaheim. So, who was on the panel this year? Well, first up, we are being moderated by Rob May from the Omnic Lab podcast. And then also on the panel, we have Icy Sorrow from Enter the Iris. We have the Blevins from, High Noon, Around the Payload, whatever umpteenth High Noon Productions podcasts there are. There's always new ones coming out of the woodwork, so I really can't keep track. There's Foul Play.
Blackwatch Report.
Well, he's not technically on that one, so I can't really include that one. But regardless, High Noon, they do a ton of Overwatch-related podcasts. And, they're very close friends to us. And we have Andres, also from Omnic Lab. I'll recap. We have my game night nemesis, Blazin' Bob, from, Watchpoint Radio. I'll recap, prepare to attack. And, of course, Spider, since you're unable to make it this year, unfortunately, I am going to be taking your place on this panel. So, I'll be representing, our network, Overwatch League Network, H&D, Overwatch Recall, whatever else is going to be coming out of the woodwork, because, stuff is coming at some point. It's going to happen. Maybe some fantasy Overwatch League. Maybe. Or hashtag soulmates. I don't know. Things could always happen, but last year the panel had a lot of talent. This year, we have a lot of kind of like the Overwatch podcaster OGs, because Rob, the Blevins, and myself, we've been around the block for quite some time, and then you add on, we have
2.5 years ago,
right? But we're rounded out by great friends, and but I'm really excited about this panel, and since Lambo's not going to be in charge of the microphone, people aren't going to feel any neglect. We won't have to do any behind the scenes interviews or anything like that, trying to get people to voice their frustrations, to kind of get back at Slambo. But someone's going to bring it up again, not just myself, but it's going to happen. But that being said, check it out. This is going to be, it'll be on basically all of the podcast catchers for all of these podcasts, basically. So definitely check it out when it does come. But if you're going to be at BlizzCon, definitely come and support Con Before the Storm, because they do a hell of a lot of work for the community, and it's a community event, so definitely check it out. But anyways, moving on, check out Overwatch Recall. That is our Overwatch League, Path to Pro podcast, listings. So every Sunday we post it on our website at owlnshow.com/weekly recall. So, it's just a quick way to find all the current content out there in podcast form. But Spider, now that all of that is out of the way, where can our listeners and viewers know where to get a hold of us?
Sure thing. If you want to email the show, you can do so at contact@owlnshow.com. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at owlnshow. Our website, same thing, www.owlnshow. Our YouTube, we have our YouTube link now, but it's different, so pay attention. It's youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. We put videos up there every week. Definitely check it out. I didn't do one for Busan this time because I just had a lot of real life stuff going on. Normally I have map reviews, I have, new character previews, rework previews, they're teasing some Pharah stuff, so there will be more videos coming.
Okay, so is it going to be like a 10-hour video of us just playing the dance pad game? Because it should be.
While Reinhardt sings in the background. So, yeah, I am sad I missed the Busan video, but there was just, right now, there was no way with all the current stuff. But that's in the past now, so I can concentrate on YouTube again. You can find our Discord at discord.me/OWLN show. If you're listening via audio, you can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/OWLN show. We are a Twitch affiliate, so you can subscribe, get a cool little emote, and help support the channel to keep things running and keep the lights on. We have multiple shows every week. We have two primary shows running right now. It is Overwatch League Network, which is normally Mondays at 7 p.m. PDT. Like I said, we had to move it this week due to my real life. And then we also have Heroes Never Die, which is our variety Overwatch show, which is normally Wednesdays at 5 p.m. PDT, but we had to move that because Edinar has the plague. But apparently he will get better, and you guys are doing that tomorrow night now?
That is correct.
So
Thursday at 5 p.m. PT, this week only.
Yes. So special Thursday show with Ebinar, apparently. Not Edinar, because he will succumb to the plague. We also do host streams every weekend. I usually take Friday nights, usually starting around 7:30 PDT. This Friday, if my team that I coach doesn't have a scrim, I will be playing Doomfist. If they have a scrim, I will cover the scrim and then play Doomfist. And then Totem usually takes up Saturday nights. And
not lately.
Yeah, we've kind of taken, like I said, I had a lot of stuff. So there was no way I could have done it the past couple of weeks. But normally you take Saturday nights and you and Edinar just tilt out an arcade, apparently. Or quick play or comp or whatever mode you're going to be angry at this week. Our third host, who is currently trialing for Atlanta's GM spot, Slambo. If you want to get a hold of him, you can do so on Twitter at SlamboVerWatch. You can find myself on Twitter at SpiderGD. And then I'm right here on Twitch, OWLN Show. Where can they find you, Totem?
Well, I am over on Twitter at TumblyDrunkCTR, and if I'm live on Twitch 2, 3, 4, however many nights a week, it'll of course be here at twitch.tv/OWLN Show. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and get the heck out of Dodge. Again, this has been episode number 50. I am Tumbling Drunk, joined, as per usual, by my co-host Spider, and we will see you guys back, hopefully tomorrow, for an extra spicy edition, leaks and all. And I know Michael posted something on Twitlonger, so I'm curious to see what that is tomorrow for Heroes Never Die at 5 p.m. PT. I think, yeah, that's right.
Sometime tomorrow.
Yes, it's 5 p.m. PT, and we will see you then, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Overwatch League Network. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at OWLN Show. The theme music for OWLN is the main theme and victory theme guitar remix by Michael Mack.